Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be listening to the 7th part of What If Deku Was in Villain Class 1A. If you enjoy, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing down below, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified when videos go live. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 17, What Do You Want From Us? Welcome to the first tournament match of the UA First Year Sports Festival. Present Mike yelled as the crowd thundered around him. Monoma walked up the stairs, his expression serious and sure as he came face to face with 18 and his cocky smile. This is going to be a good one, folks. It's the strategic head of the hero course, hot on the heels of Class A for the entirety of the competition, Naoto Monoma. The roar of approval greeted Monoma's ears. He was the good guy. May 18th have had a similar quirk to him, but he was the villain. Monoma would prove that he was more than this. He was not powerless, he would win this competition and show the world that the villains could never win. Versus, someone we really should have been watching out for from the beginning. It's the class president of 1A, Izuku Midoriya. Inevitably, the audience began to boo and hiss. Yes, Monoma would be victorious, he'd take down the leader. But he had to be careful. 18 could have stolen any one of his classmates' abilities and could give that up to take Monoma's whenever he wanted. Are you ready? Cried Present Mike. Say it with me, folks. 3. Monoma shifted into a battle stance. 2. 18 drew his sword. 1. Begin. They both charged immediately. And they're off. Monoma had thought through what quirks he needed carefully, and his classmates were more than willing to help. But there was a secret that he was sure 18 didn't know of. There were some quirks that Monoma simply couldn't copy. Midoriya is gaining fast and that sword of his looks pretty sharp. Shiozaka's vines took days of meditating in sunlight to grow, but Monoma only had 5 minutes with that quirk. It was useless to him. Bondo's glue quirk had a mutation around his face, where the glue would be released from holes around his eyes. Monoma didn't have that, so no glue quirk. In the end, Monoma had Kamakuri's blades. Shota's double hit. Honmuki's softening. What will Monoma do? As soon as 18 was close enough, Monoma slammed his foot onto the ground and let the concrete melt into a quicksand-like trap. But 18 must have seen the ripples approaching on the floor, because he dodged in an instant. So close. Looks like Monoma has a trick or two up his sleeve. Why? Let's give him a little introduction, shall we? Naoto Monoma, his quirk, copy. He can copy the quirk of anyone he touches, but only for 5 minutes. 18 still hadn't revealed what quirk he had, so Monoma kept trying to trap him, force the secret out into the open. Monoma must have copied some of his classmates' powers that he believed were best suited for his fight against Midoriya. The other presenter, Class A's Mr. Izawa, droned. But did he make the right decisions? Present Mike yelled dramatically. Monoma wasn't nearly as powerful as Honmuki was with this quirk. He could only send out one wave of softening at a time. He couldn't just control the entire battlefield. 18 must have realized this because he was dodging with great efficiency and quickly gaining ground. Midoriya's getting closer. Let's hope Monoma has something to protect against that sword. What did 18 have? Maybe the gravity quirk? That wouldn't make sense. He'd have to touch him anyway, and by then he could just take Monoma's ability. Could Monoma copy whatever 18 had on him? He didn't know all of Class A's quirks, no matter how hard he'd tried to study them when given the opportunity. Perhaps it was the quirk similar to Tetsu, so 18 could protect himself against Kamakuri's blades, an obvious choice for Monoma. But he'd thought he'd take Todoroki's quirk and defeat him in an instant. No matter, because he was now too close for comfort. From the time that Class A had tried to escape, Monoma knew that Kamakuri's blades did not count as part of him, and 18 couldn't steal his quirk by touching them. Midoriya dodges and he dropped Honmuki's quirk to use Kamakuri's, 18's blade crashing against his in mere moments. Monoma blocks it. The double hit quirk that Monoma had in his figurative back pocket meant that if he were to attack, activating the power would make the force of that attack land again, even if Monoma had backed away from his opponent by this point. All he needed to do was strike 18 with the strength of Kamakuri's quirk, quickly deactivate it to use Shota's, and slowly force the enemy backwards in the shock of it. However, none of this mattered if he couldn't land a hit. Hey. Midoriya's pretty good with that thing. Monoma's playing on his terms. Can he still come out on top? Rather than continuing to push Minoma's blade back with his own, 18 hit it aside and jabbed at Minoma's chest. He stumbled back as 18 struck again and again, never quite touching him, but was frighteningly close. Minoma kept trying to strike back, but 18 parried the blow away in an instant. Minoma formed another blade on his other arm, trying to protect himself. Looks like Minoma's struggling here. But will Midoriya be able to hold up against two blades? Midoriya may not be an expert, said Mr. Aizawa, but he's far more familiar with this style of fighting than Minoma. He hated it, but the grumpy teacher was absolutely right. Minoma should have borrowed Setsuna's quirk, but he had been so worried about 18 touching his skin and stealing the ability. Realizing he was now far too close to the edge of the pitch for comfort, Minoma cried out and kicked 18 backwards. It bought him just enough time to switch to Shota's quirk, and before 18 could recover, he was hit again. Midoriya is hit backwards with an invisible force. That looks like Niranjiki Shota's double hit quirk to me. Class B must have been keen to help Minoma defeat Class A's president. Minoma switched to Honuki's quirk. The ground before him rippled and softened. He saw 18's foot sink into the edge of the liquid concrete. He finally had the upper hand. There was an explosion with no warning to it, barely even a sound. Minoma shielded his eyes from a plum of black-gray smoke or ash or something. This must have been the quirk 18 took. Was it Bakugo's? There's no way he let him take it. Why didn't he use it earlier? What just happened? I can't see a thing. Knowing he was in serious trouble here, Minoma took out the blades again, backing away from where he was sure 18 had been stuck to the ground as he waited for the cloud to disperse. And then, he felt the air move around him, and the coolness of metal against his skin. 18 gripped Minoma's arm, and he felt the blades shrink away into nothingness in an instant. The smoke faded quickly, leaving behind the view of Minoma struggling against 18's grip, his sword against his neck in an act that was surely purposefully ironic. You can't use your quirks, give up. 18 yelled in his ear. Minoma let out a cry of frustration. Give up. Okay, fine, I yield. Minoma surrenders, shouted Miss Midnight. Midoriya wins. The crowd erupted into a confused frenzy, applauding yet clearly disappointed in the result. What was that, huh? Present Mike exclaimed as 18 took his sword away from Minoma. Where'd the cloud come from? Is that Midoriya's quirk? You know it isn't his quirk, Mr. Aizawa sighed exasperatedly. It was clearly a smoke bomb. Midoriya must have some in his utility belt. A smoke bomb? Minoma gaped, running his hand across his neck, where the sword had been held. Then what's Midoriya's quirk? Minoma glared at 18. This was where the villainous version of Minoma's own copy quirk was revealed. He may have been defeated, but this wasn't over. The audience was against 18, and the rest of his class would still have to face some of the strongest members of Class B yet. He wouldn't hold this winning streak for. Midoriya doesn't have a quirk. What? Minoma found himself saying aloud, gaping at 18 as he slid his weapon back into his sheath, the fearsome expression on his face not wavering for a moment. Minoma wasn't the only one who was shocked. The volume of the entire stadium dimmed dramatically as they realized this unreal truth. Mr. Aizawa continued, Midoriya is quirkless, but he is also an adept fighter. He is quick to pick up new skills, and his leadership in Class 1A is unquestioned. They're all trying so hard, working together, because he told them to. He doesn't need any power at all to be the most dangerous member of that class. With a slight smile, 18 brushed the dust that the smoke bomb left behind off his shoulder. He turned away from Minoma and marched across the arena to his exit, holding his head high triumphantly. Minoma could only stare as he walked away, the gold bands on his arms glinting in the sun, the red sheath of his sword crossing over the bold 18 on his back. Shoto walked through the halls to his first match. He was smiling. They cheered and clapped as Yayorozu faced Mina in the first match that did not carry such heavy stakes. Yayorozu won, of course, but the amount of progress Mina had made over these short weeks had been undeniable. It was hard to believe that she was put in Class A for a dangerous, uncontrollable ability, one that she had now seemed to have all but mastered. Since both girls were members of Class A, the audience seemed to forget which side they were on, and for once, the match felt unbiased and entertaining. Midoriya's fight just felt sad. Minoma looked so shocked, and the audience almost seemed sorry for Midoriya, despite him being the indisputable victor. Shoto was also against someone from Class A, Zero. He knew it wasn't going to be much of a fight. Zero's quirk just wasn't a good matchup against Shoto's own, but he'd give him a chance, at least a few moments to show off his capabilities. He was in no rush. The arena had to be patched up from the puddles of acid Mina had left sizzling slowly on the concrete surface. But he needed some air, so he left the rest of his class a little early. Midoriya was scared. He had been sitting by Shoto whilst they watched the match, but Shoto could tell that his friend was trying to distract himself. After all, his charade of having a quirk was finally up, and he was back to what he'd always been, quirkless. Not that it mattered, but it clearly had a huge impact on Midoriya. Shoto could feel the stress radiating off him. He would be up against Yayorozu next. If he won that, then the first requirement of the deal he'd struck with the principal was fulfilled. But she was an incredibly tough opponent. Nonetheless, no one could know the outcome until the moment arrived. Shoto was almost at the entrance to the arena, and he, like Midoriya, had to brace himself not just for the fight, but for the thousands upon thousands of disapproving eyes that would be staring. He stopped. Thoughts of his classmates were banished to the wind as Shoto rested his gaze upon the towering figure at the end of this last corridor. Bright flames flickered across his face and shoulders, reflecting in his gaze, anything but warm. It had been months. Shoto had known it was coming. He looked right past Endeavor, eyes fixed on the wall just behind him as he marched forwards, pace picking up as he drew closer, heart beating faster. He was just about to slip past him when a vast hand gripped Shoto's arm in a vice-like hold. "I don't know what game you're playing," his father's voice thundered. "But I don't like it one bit." "Good," was the word that never left his lips. No, he owed nothing to this man, not his love nor loyalty, not even the hatred Shoto had kindled for so long. He deserved none of it. Shoto tried to pull his arm away, father only held tighter. "You will win this festival," he ordered. "You will do so with both sides of your power, and if I see the slightest hesitation when faced with your classmates, you will." "If I win this festival it won't be for you," Shoto interrupted, not willing to subject himself to these poisonous words any longer. "If I choose to be a hero, it won't be for you." Although he still refused to look at him, Shoto could feel Endeavor's gaze grow harsher. "You can't hide from your legacy, your blood, your power." "I'm not hiding from it," Shoto snapped. There was a moment of silence. "UA has improved you, if only slightly. Let go of me." "But it's clear it can do no more. Class 1A is a bad influence on you, especially that quirkless representative. Don't you dare say a word against him. After the festival we'll see if we can have you transferred away from." Shoto snatched his arm away and glared up at his father. "You can't take me away from here, you put me here." He crossed his arms. "Tell me where Dabi is hiding. If I knew I would be there." "But that's exactly what you tried to do." Shoto wavered, and Endeavor sneered. "I know about that little escape attempt Class A tried to pull off, and I know you would have gone straight back to him. Tell me where he is, and I'll consider letting you stay." "I don't know where he is." "Don't lie to." "I don't know where he is. He should be here, I shouldn't be here." There was a moment of silence. Shoto shuddered in anger, his voice already aching, his last words echoing in his ears. "This is your last chance," his father warned. "Don't blow it." Some really freaky elbows. It's Class 1A's Hanta Zero versus someone who's been part of a story that has gripped the nation for the last 2 years. It's none other than the youngest son of our number 2 hero, Shoto Todoroki. Shoto heard none of this. His gaze hardened and cold, piercing into his opponent, who looked back at him with a nervous smile. "Begin." It did not end well for Zero. The audience was silent. Even more than it had been at the revelation of Midoriya's quirklessness. What the hell, man?" Zero stammered, frozen solid in a mass of ice so vast that it stretched out higher than the arena itself. "I'm sorry," Shoto whispered to him as he began to melt him free, focusing on the itching fire that longed to break free inside of him. "I was angry. Tetsu had just been defeated by the Shinso guy. It wasn't hard to rile Honuki's loudmouthed classmate up. He had been brainwashed in moments, forced to walk out of the arena. The audience had been excited to watch a match between two of the good guys. After the long wait Todoroki caused, the ice took a while to remove. But they quickly decided that Shinso, was not someone they wanted to side with. It was Hatsum's and Toga's turn now. Present Mike may have started off hyping the crowd up for a support versus support battle, but it soon became clear that this was not the girls' intention. 5 minutes into a prolonged advertisement of Jaime Industries, Class B had clearly had enough. "This is stupid," huffed Setsuna. "They're just running amok." All of Class A are, and the students from the other courses are clearly on their side. No one said a word for a little longer, until Tsuburabo finally spoke up. "We're going to get the blame for this, aren't we?" Honmuki frowned at him. "How come?" "Because the hero course is supposed to win," he sighed, "and not only is it extremely unlikely that we'll make it past the first set of battles, but we're going to lose too, well, you know." 18. A few eyes flickered towards Monoma, who hadn't really talked at all since his match against Midoriya. Pony tapped Honmuki on his shoulder. She was American, and although her Japanese was getting an awful lot better, there were still some gaps in her vocabulary. Luckily enough, Honmuki was as proficient in English as she was in Japanese, so together, they could always get the message across. "What were they talking about with Class A's president again?" she asked him in English. "The air, what's the word? I literally can't even repeat it. Air. Quirkless." Honmuki guessed. Yeah, so, he doesn't have a power or something." "Yeah, no power at all," he nodded, now speaking in Japanese again. There was another moment of silence before Tsuburaba spoke up again. "We're supposed to be the most powerful hero students in the country," he reminded them, "and we've lost to a quirkless villain." "Guys, don't be so harsh about it," Honmuki retorted, a little shocked, "honestly. Midori is not someone to be taken lightly, with or without a quirk. But that's not what the rest of the world will see, is it? It's the truth. Any one of us could struggle against Midoriya if he had the right strategy and support items, which is what happened today. It's not Monoma's fault that Midoriya was prepared," Honmuki said harshly. "And him being quirkless gives Monoma a massive disadvantage, because he could cancel out his quirk. They had to fight without powers and Monoma didn't have the capabilities to do that." "Why not?" Monoma finally spoke up, not looking away from the advertisements the support course girls were performing down below. "Are you saying I'm as good as quirkless?" Honmuki hesitated. "Well, against Midoriya, kind of. You know it's not a big deal, right? I mean, look at Midoriya, he's not exactly weak." "Well, he is." Monoma suddenly snapped, finally turning around in his chair to stare at them all, bearing an expression of mixed emotions. "He is weak, and I lost. What does that make me?" "You're not weak, Monoma," Kendo interjected, leaning forwards a little. "And I think Midoriya has proven that he is weak," he yelled. "Deny it all you want, but he doesn't have the strength that any of you, or his classmates, possess. He has nothing, he isn't strong, and I still can't win. Any of us could learn the skills that he's got. He doesn't have anything that is uniquely his, he has no quirks, no quirk. Don't any of you get it? 18 represents the bare minimum, something that we are supposed to be far better than. If we can't beat him, there are going to be some people out there who question whether we are worth UA's time." There was another moment of silence. "I think you're all looking at this the wrong way," said Honmuki. "Midoriya isn't trying to make everyone feel weak, he's showing that everyone can be strong. It's like the old, anyone can be a hero shtick." "But he's not a hero," Monoma reminded him, only after the half-hearted applause had died down at the end of Hatsum's and Toga's marketing spree. Hatsum had just walked out of the ring and Midnight had to uncertainly announce Toga as the winner. Honmuki shrugged, sinking further into his chair. "He wants to be." "What?" Awaze almost laughed. Wait, you're not kidding." Honmuki blinked at him and shook his head. Oh, I wasn't saying like, there was no chance for a quirkless person to be a hero, but doesn't that defeat the point? And, isn't Midoriya definitely a villain? He's a really nice person, Honmuki insisted. "I talk to him all the time when he's in detention, you know this. He's just had a tough life, and this is how it's ended up for him." Monoma put his head in his hands whilst the next two competitors walked out into the battlefield, both from Class A again, Aitsa and Kirishima. "Wait," Monoma suddenly frowned. "Honmuki, you knew he was quirkless all along, didn't you?" All of Class B turned to stare at him. Honoki glanced around at them all anxiously. Yeah. I did try to tell you, but you kept ignoring me. We just lost the tournament because of that, man. Tetsu yelled. He'd been standing at the back of their walled-off section of the stands for a while now. They kind of need this more than us, Honoki pointed out. What do they need it for, laughed Tsuburaba. To make us all look like idiots. To get onto the hero course. We're the hero course. Well, next year there'll be 2 hero course classes, Honoki explained. So, maybe they want one of those classes to be theirs. They could transfer directly to Class 2A. Second years don't have a redemption class at all, it's A and B for second year hero courses. That class is for transfer students, said Sen. Honoki simply shrugged again. Look, Midori is a smart guy, he wouldn't be urging his class to be doing so well if there wasn't a good reason behind it. Otherwise, they really would be running amok, trying to make this whole thing look like a joke. I mean, look at those two, they're taking this seriously. He pointed down at the arena where Aitsa and Kirishima were locked in combat. Aitsa skidded around his opponent as though he were trying to disorientate him. Kirishima kept lashing out to try and hit Aitsa, but his blows never landed. On the other side of the partition in the stands, Honoki could just hear Class A cheering and hooping for their classmates, urging them on. Next was Shiozaka's fight, but she was up against Bakugo. Her explosive and temperamental opponent was a big challenge, and her quirk was not a good match for the fire the Class A student could produce. Although no one wanted to admit it, Shiozaka could not win that fight. After them, it was Honoki's turn. If his predictions were right and Shiozaka couldn't pull this off, Honoki was Class B's only hope. But against the zero-gravity villain, Honoki knew it wouldn't be plain sailing. Even after that, he would find himself facing either Shiozaka, which would result in a Class B knockout anyway, or Bakugo himself, someone else who could utilize the air in their fights. Kirishima had suddenly found himself standing outside the arena, in a burst of speed from Aitsa unlike anything he'd ever shown before. Kirishima is out of bounds, Aitsa is the winner. Midnight's voice boomed, and the crowd cheered. Class A seemed to cheer louder. Shiozaka stood up, running her hands through the vines she bore instead of hair. Good luck, Komura smiled at her. Kode gave her a nod to show that she felt the same. Yeah, do your best, Ibara, smiled Kendo, but everyone knew there was little hope for victory here. The solemn attitude was crushing. Not wanting to witness the defeat, Honoki left his classmates behind to sit in a waiting room and mull over his strategies. Alone. Shiozaka's defeat was quick and merciless. Class A was a little less enthusiastic with their cheering this time since it was clear from the start that Kiken had this in the bag. He didn't hold back, showed no signs of hesitation, and was never even scratched. Scorched and exhausted, poor Shiozaka tumbled backwards over the borderline after a fatal explosion from Kiken, and it was all over. Present mix commentary didn't help Bakugo's cause, and he left the battlefield shouldering even more hatred towards Class A than they'd suffered to begin with. But Yurika had to give it to Shiozaka, she didn't give up. Even when her vines were obliterated every time that she got close, she kept trying. It was that kind of resilience that Yurika strived to achieve herself. And when she faced Kiken after her match against Honoki from Class B, she would be the same, she was sure of it. Well, I guess it's my turn. Yurika beamed, standing up and resting her hands on her hips. You got this, Okako. Mina yelled, standing up too and punching the air. Midori stood up to hold her back for a moment. Jay, just hear me out for a moment, he started. If you win this, WWBE won. Class B is completely out of the competition and don't put pressure on her, Midoriya. Aitsa snapped. And no. Of course not. Midori stammered, glancing between the two of them and raising his hands in mock surrender. I just wanted to say, be careful when you use your grappling hook. Yurika cocked her head to one side. What do you mean? Look, we don't have time, he rushed, just, you know where the emergency release button is, right? Where? Underneath the, yeah, right there, that one. Okay. Yurika grinned, trying not to sound too nervous. Oh, and take this. Midori handed her a small, gray orb from his utility belt. She frowned at it, turning it over in her hand. Is this one of your smoke bombs? He nodded. Put it in your pocket, just in case. She smiled at him again. "Ah, thank you. Now luck, give me all the luck." "Good luck," they all chorused, which encouraged a few laughs as she waved goodbye and sprinted down the corridor behind the stands. She could do this. Her parents would be watching, and she'd prove that well, she didn't know quite what she would be proving. Maybe that she was on the right path now? If that got across, especially after Kiken's fight. But it was fine. Everything would be fine. "Well, just look at Himiko," Toga insisted on being called by her first name. She used to be a member of Class 1A, and now she was doing great. Yuriko would be a hero, and she'd be the kind of hero who really helped people. Not just from falling buildings, but from themselves. She'd be the hero that she'd always needed. Sometimes, people forget that villains need saving too. He got into UA's hero course through recommendations, is one of the strongest members of Class B, and on top of it all, has one killer smile. It's Jozo Honmuki. The crowd roared, clapping their hands and cheering at the top of their voice when the last standing member of Class B came to a halt opposite Yurika, on the far side of the battlefield. Present Mike took a deep breath, versus, she may not look it, but this member of Class 1A had some of our finest detectives up round the clock. Will this once villain be giving Honmuki a run for his money too? It's the infamous thief, Zero, Okako Yurika. Go Okako. You got this, girl. So, wait, Okako really is Zero? I don't know, I hadn't really heard of her before all this. Apparently, she was a big deal. Yeah. Do you think he'll pull his punches because he's against a girl? Obviously not. Yeah, we saw you during the escape attempt. You were too much of a wuss to go after Kode. Excuse me, I've never hit a girl in my life. We noticed, try harder. Yurika tried her best to block out the noise of the stadium and focus only on the faint whispers of her friend's usual antics. Here, she wasn't Zero, she was Yurika. She could be whoever she wanted, and this was her declaration. But then the ringing scream of the word begin filled her ears. She blinked and she wasn't in the stands, she was standing in the center of a ring of eyes, as a trained and capable enemy began his charge. She felt like a gladiator, the one that was thrown down there to meet their doom. But Yurika wasn't the pitiful, meek girl she once was. After all, she was never actually caught as a villain, she was sold out. And she wasn't about to end her winning streak here. You saw a sneak peek during Monoma's match, but here it is in high definition. Present Mike yelled as Yurika's opponent made his first move, Jozo Honmuki, his quirk, softening. He can drastically soften any non-living thing he touches. How can Yurika fight when the ground is made of liquid concrete? Like this. Yurika cried to no one but herself. Pushing off the last bit of solid ground before the floor before her melted into a gray sea, she activated her power on herself and leapt into the sky. Okako Yurika, her quirk, zero gravity. She can nullify the effect of gravity from anything she touches with all 5 fingers. How is Honmuki going to fight when his opponent is in the sky, completely unaffected by his power? Okay, Present Mike was just yelling a whole load of nonsense. Yurika tried her best to block him out and focus. She needed to get close to Honmuki. If she could get him away from the ground, she could float him right out of the arena. Yurika aimed her arm at her opponent, clenched her teeth and pressed the button. The grappling hook, more like an arrow attached to a length of rope, shot out and slammed right into the gloppy ground next to the hero student. She didn't hesitate to press the second button and pull herself in. The arrow may have been wrenched back out of the ground, but he supplied more than enough propulsion to send her flying in Honmuki's direction. He, however, darted out of the way at the last second, hardening the ground beneath him as he ran. Yurika pivoted in mid-air and sent her grappling hook in the other direction, pulling her around and back into the fight before she floated out of bounds. She was sure was going to hit him this time, but even closer than he had been before, Honmuki took a deep breath and sunk right out beneath Yurika's grasp, sinking into the ground in an instant and disappearing. Yurika screeched as she tumbled to the floor, only just inside the white border lines. Brushing the slightest hint of blood away from her cheek, Yurika got to her feet and gazed out before her. Uh-oh, looks like Honmuki is trying out an interesting tactic here. Present Mike almost laughed. Will Yurika be able to figure out where he went before? With a yelp, Yurika felt a pale hand grip her ankle, the floor falling apart beneath her as she was pulled under the surface, only just able to take a breath of air before the light vanished. The hand left her ankle, now gripping her arm behind her back and pulling her up to the surface again. She was done for, she was doomed, she would let down her friends, no, no, no. And just as the light returned, in a moment of panic, Eureka managed to toss Midori's smoke bomb blindly into the air. Somehow, Eureka's feet found solid ground, and she leapt out of the plum of gray smoke and dust, into the sky once more, her safe haven. Finally able to see again, Eureka looked around, spying Honuki just below, coughing on whatever the smoke bomb was made out of and furiously wiping it away from his eyes, knee-deep in softened concrete. He must have been trying to trap Eureka under the ground, with only her head and shoulders visible so she could still see and breathe, but he hadn't quite hardened the floor again by the time Eureka made her move. It was an incredibly lucky escape. But she knew she couldn't waste any more time. Ignoring present mixed disappointed cries about poor visibility and a drastic turn of events, Eureka aimed her grappling hook once more at the ground around Honuki. She fired, unsurprised to see it not sink in far. She knew it wouldn't give her much momentum but maybe just enough to let her reach. Oh no. Glaring up at her, Honuki rested his hand on the ground and froze the concrete back to its normal solidity, with the end of her grappling hook still stuck inside. She'd propel herself right back into the trap. Panicking, Eureka fumbled, and only in the last second did she recall Midori's mutterings of an emergency release button. It all happened so quickly. Eureka's rope fell away from the device on her arm, freeing her. Honuki, unprepared, held his hand up upon instinct, and Eureka slammed right into him, kicking him in the chest. Her legs buckled and she rolled to the side to absorb the impact. Honuki had slammed his head against the ground that he had thankfully only just managed to soften, but in the shock, he was nowhere near ready for Eureka's next move. She dived back at him, her fingertips brushing against his bare arm, quirk activating with a soft, pink glow. By now, she was on the other side of him. She pulled his weightless body up, and with a final kick, sent him soaring over the nearby border line. The arena, for the third time that afternoon, was silent as a dazed Honuki floated softly to the far wall. Eureka stood up, panting heavily, head spinning, as she released her power and let her opponent drop harmlessly to the floor. Honuki is out of bounds, Midnight's voice echoed across the stadium, holding a tone of utter disbelief. Eureka advances to the next round. And the hero course is out of the competition. A couple more seconds passed before Eureka punched the sky and yelled a victory cry, alongside a small and awfully specific portion of the audience. She span in a circle once or twice, laughing and almost crying at the edge of the pitch. Making eye contact with her classmates, who hung over the edge of their barricade at their section of the stands, Eureka braved activating her power one last time to leap towards them and grab Mina's outstretched hand fearlessly. Few clapped and even fewer could have known what this possibly meant. But Class A didn't care, they'd as good as won. This was it, she'd really graduated Class 1A. She wasn't a villain anymore. She could be a hero. And as they chanted her name and Momo tossed a little pouch of confetti in the air, Eureka already felt like she was one. Chapter 18, What Do We Want From You? Honuki sighed as he sat back down amongst Class 1B. No one said a single word. It's the second round of the tournament and it's been an interesting start. Present mic boomed. We have 8 competitors remaining, so why don't we give you a little reminder? Eraserhead. Would you like to do the honors? Not really, Mr. Aizawa deadpanned. Last round we saw Class 1A's Okako Eureka defeat Jozo Honuki with an innovative use of her gravity nullification quirk. Honuki watched spectacular images of the fight flicker across the massive screen on the opposite side of the stadium, ending with Eureka jumping into the air, a beaming smile across her face. He gritted his teeth, the weight of defeat crushing down on him. Honuki was recommended to get into UA, he had to prove his worth. And he'd lost. Before that, Katsuki Bakugo, from the same class, bested Ibara Shiozaka, his explosive quirk proving to have a massive advantage over Shiozaka's plant-based abilities. He looked away for those images, they were a little less heartwarming. Mr. Aizawa cleared his throat, and Eijiro Kirishima also found himself in a poor matchup against Class A's vice president, Tinya Itza, the younger brother of the retired pro hero, Ingenium. His engine-powered legs give him great speed that Kirishima had no chance in matching. Himiko Toga, a member of the support course, Class 1D, was the decided winner of, well, not much of a fight against her friend and classmate, Mei Hatsum. Present Mike continued. Toga was a member of Class 1A last year. Isn't that right, Eraserhead? He grunted in response. Hitachi Shinso is in General Studies, Class 1C. He forced the hero course's Tetsu out of the ring with a brainwashing power. Talk about unexpected, grinned Present Mike, clearly trying to make this as enjoyable as possible. He now faces the son of Endeavor, Shoto Todoroki, whose quirk nearly froze the entire arena in an easy defeat of his classmate, Hanta Suro. Momo Yaoyorozu used creative techniques to take down Mina Ashido, neutralizing her acid and trapping her in nets until she finally slipped up and fell out of bounds. And who could forget Class A's president, Izuku Midoriya? He did some neutralizing too, being able to completely nullify Naoto Monoma's copy quirk with his own quirklessness. What will this round bring, I wonder? Honmuki's classmates looked as disinterested as ever. They sulked in their seats, barely looking any of each other in the eye, as though each of them believed that they were responsible for their collective failure. First up, it's sharp-minded Midoriya, with an even sharper blade. Versus, the girl with an unlimited supply of nets, but will she be using any this time? It's Momo Yaoyorozu. Come on, who do we think is going to win? Honmuki tried, sitting up a little and forcing a grin. No one replied. Guys, come on, Honmuki groaned, desperately trying to push the sickening feeling of anxiety out of his chest. We've done everything we can, so let's just try and enjoy it now. How can we, said Setsuna, gesturing vaguely at the arena when Midoriya and Yaoyorozu walked steadily up to their starting positions. Like everyone else? This is only our first sports festival, we'll have other chances. Come on, I think Midoriya's going to win, but it'll be really close. What do you think, Pony? She glanced at him from the corner of her eyes, smiling glumly. You maybe. Ready? Present Mike proclaimed, begin. Midoriya drew his sword and charged forwards whilst Yaoyorozu pulled a similar-looking blade from her arm, a grin stretching across her face as she braced herself for the battle. Come on, Midori. Honmuki couldn't even tear his eyes away from the fight as the two clashed swords and began deflecting each other's advances at remarkable speed, but he just heard Yurika's voice from the other side of the partition he was sitting right next to. You got this, man. Go, Midoriya. It was so strange, like this thin wall was the barricade between two entirely different worlds. A gloomy fog seemed to hang over Class B, their world in grayscale as they dolefully watched the ex-villains clash below them. But Honmuki could feel the adrenaline from their sister class, next door. He could hear them cry and scream encouragement at their classmates. He knew that each of their lives had been incomparably challenging, facing mountains Honmuki couldn't hope to truly comprehend. But now, they'd found themselves together, and well, for most of them, that was all they had. A world doused in colors they'd never thought they'd see. Class B was a group of privileged individuals who had committed their blood, sweat, and tears to a future that was bound to bring more of the same. Here they were, realizing that all this wasn't quite what they hoped. Class A was a group of unlikely, disadvantaged individuals who had lost blood, sweat, and tears to a past they'd never had control over, and a future that was more uncertain with every step. But here they were, realizing all was not lost, after all. Honmuki stood up, grasping his classmates' attention, but he didn't say a word. He just glanced at each of them in turn, and after none of them tried to stop him, he clambered out of his seat, and marched away. To the other side. Honmuki, croaked Tsu. She was standing up on a chair beside the invisible girl at the back of their section. Hey, Tsu, he sighed, how are you? Okay, she nodded. Hey, Honmuki, grinned Yurika, you did a super good job. I'm sorry you lost. He couldn't help but grin back at her. Don't be, really, you were amazing. You earned that win. She beamed. Present Mix commentary continued, but Yaoyorozu's a step ahead of him, and she brings a shield out of nowhere. Mind if I join you? Honmuki asked, stepping further into Class A's seating area. Not a single one of them were sitting down, either standing on chairs or squeezing alongside each other and leaning over the barricade to get as close to the battlefield as possible. But a few of Class A didn't seem keen for him to be there. Why don't you go back to your hero course buddies, sneered the purple-haired girl with the number 12 written across her back. Honmuki didn't quite know all their names. They're kind of sulking, he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "And if I start cheering Midoriya on, I think they might throw me out." A few of them laughed. Honnuki helped Midoriya expel Mineta. Tsu perked up, informing the others. Honnuki had no clue he had been involved in some plot to expel someone, but he did know Mineta was expelled after that fiasco at the USJ. He decided not to question it. "Come on, there's a space here." Eureka waved him over to the edge of the barricade, where he squished up against Class B's partition wall and leaned over beside the others. Midoriya skidded backwards when Yaoyorozu pushed him with her shield. He didn't waste a second, before he charged forwards once more. They clashed blades. Midoriya seemed to kick at the taller girl's ankles and she stumbled a little. It was enough of a mistake for Midoriya to twist her blade out of her grip and toss it across the concrete floor with a satisfying clang. Honnuki clapped his hands when the rest of Class A let out whistles and whoops, too on edge to celebrate quite yet. Midoriya lunged to supply what could have been a finishing blow. Yaoyorozu was having none of it. She'd swapped her shield to her right hand to better defend but had a trick up her sleeve. At the last second, she dropped the shield, a new sword extending from her arm to strike Midoriya when he least expected it. But he too, had a secret, a little more literally up his sleeve. He clenched his left hand around something, bringing it forwards in a sweeping motion as the new blade darted towards him, the world almost moving in slow motion, depicted in a larger view on the great screens around the arena, as a see-through shield sprung into existence from the fingerless gauntlet he wore. The blade clashed against it, leaving a sizable gash in the support item, but despite that, Midoriya grinned. Yaoyorozu was without a shield, and more than that, Honnuki narrowed his eyes and he could see it too. She seemed a little lethargic. Shifting his body, Midoriya began to spar with her again, jabbing aimlessly at her, side to side and up and down. He even managed to skim past her head, so close that it snapped the band that held her hair in a ponytail. Unfazed, she parried again and again, unable to get close to him herself because of the problem the shield supplied. She was forced backwards, eyeing up the shield she'd abandoned nearby. Midoriya noticed it too and made a move that could have easily gone very well or very poorly. He tossed, what was most likely his last smoke bomb, onto the ground, and their view was completely obscured. "Is he going to do the same to her like he did to Monoma?" frowned another member of Class A that Honnuki didn't know too well, marked 8. "I don't think she'll fall for that," muttered Honnuki. The dust cloud faded soon enough. Perhaps the smoke bomb was a little different from the others, because Honnuki was sure that there was an awful lot more dust remnants on the floor. In fact, he could barely see where the border line was. "I think he's trying to trick her into walking out the ring," Honnuki realized, leaning further forwards and trying to picture himself in Yaoyorozu's shoes. "Oh, that's a good point," Eureka exclaimed. "Come on, Midoriya, come on," muttered 6 under his breath. They were all on Midoriya's side, rather than their other classmates. Maybe it was just because he was their class president, but was there more riding on this than he knew of? The cover that the smoke had given did not result in either competitor's defeat, but the two had changed positions. The abandoned shield seemed to have moved and was now lying right on top of the border line, hidden by the thick layer of black dust that persisted to float around them. After gathering their bearings, the fight continued. Midoriya still had his shield and Yaoyorozu had little to protect herself with. From the way she held herself and the slower way she moved, it was clear that she was running out of time. Perhaps her quirk had zapped her energy. It seemed likely. Midoriya had no such disadvantage. Yaoyorozu didn't risk making another shield, something that present Mike was keen to acknowledge. Mr. Izawa swooped in to defend his student by pointing out the same matter that Honnuki had thought of. She was fast approaching her limit after everything she'd already pulled off today, specifically her match against Ashido, from which she had little time to recover from. The clanging of metal against metal as their battle continued seemed to fill the arena, despite the vastness of it and the noise of the crowd. They circled around one another. Honnuki saw Yaoyorozu eyeing up that shield again, knowing she'd make no more advances without it. They completed their circle so Yaoyorozu was closest to the shield again. Just as Honnuki was sure she'd take a dive for it, likely Midoriya thinking the same thing, she deflected her opponent's blade and sent a devastating blow at Midoriya's flimsy shield. And although Honnuki winced and present Mike made it out as a bad thing, he soon realized Midoriya's smile. The blade dug deep through the plastic, pushing through to the other side, but when Yaoyorozu tried to strike again, it was clear that her weapon was stuck fast. Like Eureka's grappling hook, The shield seemed to have an emergency release button, because it wasn't long before the plastic was detached from Midoriya's arm and it, along with Yaoyorozu's sword, was tossed out of bounds. Honmuki held his breath as Midoriya lunged again at defenseless Yaoyorozu. But to his surprise, she ducked and rolled, reaching for her boot and pulling out a stashed knife. Now in a fighting style Midoriya surely wasn't used to, she lashed out and drove him backwards. Honmuki didn't know what he'd expected, but it definitely wasn't for Midoriya to shove his sword back into the sheath on his back and fight weaponless. And it definitely wasn't for him to instantaneously disarm her with a show only comparable to someone very competent at self-defense martial arts. From the screams and roars of approval from his classmates, it was clear that this wasn't too much of a shock, but still an unexpected development. Honmuki had seen Class A teach each other such moves during PE once or twice. Clearly not wanting the knife to be a factor, Midoriya tossed it out of the ring so it clattered beside the other discarded items as he drew his sword again. And this was it. Honmuki didn't dare say a word, let alone breath, and Class A seemed to do the same. Yaoyorozu ducked and rolled away from Midoriya, her loose hair in her eyes as she grasped for the shield and stood up, ready to fight once more. But Midoriya simply lowered his sword and smiled. Her own expression faded as she stood up straight and blinked, brushing the hair away from her face as she looked down at the skid marks she'd left behind in the dust. She was over the line. With Midnight's announcement of his victory, Class A burst into screams, cries and an applause to rival that of the entire stadium, and Honmuki laughed as he joined in, unsure why some had tears in their eyes as Yaoyorozu and Midoriya bowed to each other in respect, each grinning from ear to ear, laughing and leaving the arena, side by side. I can't believe it. Midoriya and Yaoyorozu walked up the stairs, back towards the seating area and out of sight of the cameras and crowd for once. I won. Midoriya beamed, so excited that he barely acknowledged that he was talking to the person he just defeated. I actually won. You deserve it, the win, Yaoyorozu grinned. I wasn't going easy on you, just as you requested. Maybe Midoriya should have stammered his thanks to her, about teaching him to fight with the sword or even giving him a chance. But he was just so excited, that the words never left his mouth. He'd completed Nizu's task. The only students that now remained in the competition were either members of Class 1A, or were the exceptions to the rule, such as Toga and Shinso. All they needed to do now was battle their way to the end, mess around and have fun. The pressure had gone, and Midoriya had already won. When the two of them reached Class A's seating area, they were greeted with an enthusiastic applause. Even Honmuki was there. You did it, you did it! Yurika cried, bouncing up and down and clapping her hands. Both of you did an amazing job, Ribbit, Tsu added. Yaoyorozu smiled and thanked her, clearly unbothered by the fact that she'd lost. Yeah, you were awesome too, Momo. Hagakure clapped. That was the best match of the day. Midoriya. The seriousness of the tone surprised him. He turned around, and at the top of the stairs that ran through their seating area, was Monoma. The smiles faded from Class A's faces. Honmuki awkwardly leaned against the barrier, turning his head to exclude himself and watch Shoto and Shinso make their way onto the pitch below for their match. Monoma hesitated, unsure about their reaction to his arrival. Can I talk with you for a moment? Midoriya narrowed his eyes at him, and folded his arms. About what? Maybe not here. Midoriya marched up the stairs until he was at the same height as Monoma. Whatever you want to say, you can say it in front of everyone here. He wavered again but realized there was no way out of the situation. He sighed deeply, tension fading from his shoulders. Brushing the hair out of his eyes, he said, Look, I'm sorry for the way I treated you. Why? Monoma blinked at the snappy remark. Why? Yes, why are you saying this now? Midoriya insisted, not at all pleased by the interruption. He wanted to watch Shoto's match. Monoma's eyes flickered between Midoriya's and the rest of Class A. Because I lost. And, you deserve it, the apology. Midoriya didn't reply for a moment. Instead, he shook his head, a small smile stretching across his lips. No, that's not why. I'm just trying to. He froze. Midoriya had drawn his sword, and the point was now inches from his nose. You're saying this now because you realized that I'm quirkless, aren't you? Monoma's gaze was fixed on the gleaming weapon for a moment. He tried to look unbothered and continued, You've clearly had to work hard to get where you are without a quirk. When I thought you had something different, I treated you like the villain you're clearly not. Midoriya could have interrupted at any point. Instead, he glared daggers at him, and lowered his real blade as Monoma spoke. I said things about quirklessness that I would never have said if I knew the truth, he explained. I shouldn't have been targeting you or trying to one-up you all the time. What else do you want me to say? You won, it could have been a fairer fight, but I know you don't work like that. Shiozaka told me to come speak to you, so here I am. Midoriya just stared at him for a moment longer, blocking out the sounds of present mix announcements as he focused on Monoma. You're not seeing it the right way, he told him calmly. What do you mean? I'm sorry, what more do you want? He snapped. I want you to understand, Midoriya glowered. Whatever expression was on his face made Monoma take a step back. You shouldn't have acted like that, whether I had a quirk or not. You had no reason to pick fights with Class A other than to boost your own ego. They were silent again for a moment. Midoriya was painfully aware of how his classmates had turned to listen in, and how even Class B had started to peer around the corner to eavesdrop. Monoma stood there, his arms folded, expression blank. Eventually, he spoke up. No, I don't understand, he said. I don't understand you. Why you're quirkless, why, you're the representative of Class 1A and you're... How? How are you in UA? Silence. How, he demanded, taking a step closer, seemingly desperate for the information. You want to know why I'm here? He raised his sword again, watching Monoma refuse to back away further or be fazed by the threat. I'm here because I'm fed up with people treating me differently because I don't have a power. I have plenty of other abilities, including the ability to make you regret doing exactly that, he said, spitting every word like venom. I'm fed up with people changing their minds, backing down because I'm not worth it, or because they pity me. But I think, I think I've proved that I'm as much of a threat now as I was before you knew the truth. Thinking I'm weak, that's what I don't deserve, and I don't want any stupid apology. I want the likes of you to stop judging people for something that they have no control over. And that goes for people like me and the rest of my class. He started to advance. Monoma had no choice other than to slowly back away from the blade. You know why I'm here, Monoma, in Class A? I'd had enough of the way I was treated, so I decided to finally do something about it. And apparently my methods were a little scary, because here I am. But you know what? I don't care. I'm glad I'm here, and I finally know what I'm going to do with it. He took away his sword, letting it fall into his sheath once more. So, let me ask you, Monoma, he grinned. Why are you here? Why am I here? He frowned, a little stunned by the interaction. To be a hero. Right. And how well is that working out for you? He glared at Midoriya, who simply smiled wildly. Maybe I shouted at a few heroes for not doing their jobs properly, said Midoriya, rolling his eyes. Maybe I did the same to a few teachers. But they had no excuse, none of them. Teachers, heroes, they have lives in their hands, futures that depend entirely on their decisions. And look at you. Doing exactly the same thing. If you want to be a hero, you've got to start acting like one. Midoriya took a breath, blocking out the stunned silence at his outburst. He wasn't finished yet, he hadn't gotten his point across. Brushing his hair from his eyes, he let his face melt into a smile once more. But it's oh so difficult for people like us, isn't it? Because you don't have a quirk either, do you? Midoriya reminded him, watching his facial expressions flicker and change. He circled him for a moment, powerless, useless, poor Monoma, having to rely on everyone else's abilities to carry him through. What is he going to do when he's on his own? Shut up, he snarled, head lowered, fists clenched and shaking. Surely you can't be a hero with a power like that. I said shut up. Midoriya stopped, dropping his smile and his facade, waiting for Monoma to realize what was happening here. Do you get it yet? Midoriya asked, mocking tone completely devoid from his voice now, as he watched Monoma blink, and realization wash over him. Do you get what it feels like? Or have you always known, and is that why you felt the need to be so competitive with Class A? Because you were scared that you'd end up like us? That you'd end up like me? He just stared for a moment, until Midoriya sighed, forcefully turned him around and steered him back towards Class B, who backed away a little at his approach. In a hushed voice, Midoriya said, "I don't need a quirk, I have all the power I need, right here." With Monoma back with his class, he turned around one last time to see Midoriya smile a little less menacingly and tap the side of his head with his finger. "You'll figure it out too, eventually," Midoriya almost laughed, stopping when he heard Present Mic announce the end of Shoto's match. Shinso was frozen in place, far below them, and Shoto's dull expression was caught on the many screens decorating the arena. He frowned at the sight, something wasn't quite right. Midoriya sighed, "Watch the rest of the festival," he told Class B, "I won't be winning next round. This isn't the real battle I'm fighting in. I've already won that one." Itsu's match with Toga lasted barely a second. Toga just smiled and waved at the cameras before spinning around on her roller skates and happily stepping out of the arena, knowing her job was already done for the day. Yurika was up against Kiken next. Midoriya would have offered to let her look in his notebook to see if any of his notes could help her out, but she stole the thing so often anyway, that he doubted there was much point. Instead, whilst he heard the distant explosions of their fight going on in the middle of the stadium, Midoriya found himself outside a waiting room, the only one with the door firmly shut. He knocked twice. "I know you're in there, Shoto." No response. "Come on, Shoto," he sighed, "I know something's up. You looked so sad in the arena just then. Sure, you didn't go quite as overboard this time as you did with Zero, but something's on your mind, and I have a feeling I know what it is." He waited there a moment longer, hoping that Shoto would at least make a sound. When he didn't, Midoriya reached out to push the door open. It didn't move as easily as he'd hoped. In fact, Midoriya had to put all his weight on the thing to make it budge. It did so suddenly, with an unexpected crunch as it opened wide. Midoriya almost fell over. The cold hit him in an instant, and Midoriya's eyes rested upon a room that could have been an abandoned hideaway in Antarctica, from the way that the ice crept up the walls, covering the table and hanging from the ceiling in sharp spikes that would easily done some damage Midoriya if they were to hit him on the head. Shoto sat in the middle of it all, not shivering nor moving a muscle, snowflakes resting on his eyelashes, a cold covering his very soul as he stared unblinkingly at the table he was sitting at. For a moment, Midoriya wondered if he, himself, was entirely frozen. Instead of saying a word, Midoriya grasped the nearest chair, tugged it away from the icy floor with some difficulty, and sat down opposite Shoto. After perhaps half a minute of cold silence, in which Midoriya's hairs stood on end, and he struggled to not shiver and curl in on himself, Shoto finally raised his eyes to meet his. "Why don't I scare you, Midoriya?" was his question. Midoriya cocked his head to one side, "S should you?" He faltered for a moment more, "Everyone else looks at me and sees something to be frightened of, something to change or something to fix. But you're different. Why?" "I'm sorry, I don't know what you want me to say. When we first met, you stepped in front of Monoma to protect me from him. Why?" Midoriya rested his elbows on the freezing table, lacing his fingers together as he cast his mind back, "Because it was unfair? And I thought you needed help." A flicker of a smile passed across Shoto's face. "You're not a villain at all, Midoriya. You never were, Mr. Aizawa was right." Midoriya blinked at him. Well, he had just shoved a blade in someone's face and laughed at them, that couldn't have been the most heroic thing to do. He decided not to inform Shoto of that. "You're not a villain either," Midoriya insisted, now picking at the ice. "I think you'd make a better hero than your dad." He glanced up, hoping to see that smile again, but it was nowhere to be seen. "I don't think I can be a hero," he said, emotion buried skin deep. "I think you can." "No, I can't," Shoto insisted, the temperature dropping just a little further. No matter what I do, if I become a hero, I'll be doing exactly what he wants." Midoriya leaned back in his chair. "You're doing that thing again, where you live your entire life around what Endeavor wants or doesn't want. What do you want?" Shoto gripped at his hair, lowering his head. "I want him gone. Out of my head, out of my way. He wants me out of UA, and I want out of UA, but I don't want to leave yet, I don't know." There was another moment of tense silence as Midoriya studied the emotions churning in his friend's mind. "I can help with that," Midoriya finally said. Shoto looked up. "What do you?" "I can't get him to leave you alone, he explained. But I can get him to want to stay away from me for the sake of his reputation. He seemed shocked. Midoriya, that matter doesn't concern you. Midoriya just grinned, but that's my favorite kind of matter. And I have everything I need, no digging required. If I could get Jiro to help out too. Principal Nizu would believe me, and once the necessary information is in his, well, pause, just imagine what it could do to Endeavor. Oh, it would be so fun. No, Shoto snapped with a ferocity that made Midoriya jump. Do you have any idea what he can do to you, to your family, your name, your future? Midoriya waved the comment off. I'm the quirkless president of UA's Class 1A. Things can literally not get much worse for me, but they can get better for you. Shoto clearly didn't know what to say. He shook his head in disbelief, that inkling of a smile returning once more. It made Midoriya grin too. We don't have to do anything at the moment, Midoriya insisted. Just know that we are in control, not Endeavor. And he can't get you out of UA until Mr. Izawa graduates you. Number 2 hero or not, he can't touch you here. Until the monitored week we get at home after the sports festival, Shoto reminded him harshly. Ah, right, yeah. I forgot about that. But we don't have to think about that right now. Look, I get you have mixed feelings about heroes, but just... Shoto, do you want to be able to help people? Midoriya didn't know what was going through Shoto's mind, but he was clearly thinking hard about something. After a while, he exhaled deeply, his breath rising before him in a column of steam. He met his eyes once more, and said, yes. This was the moment that Present Mick's booming voice rang through the halls, announcing Uraraka's defeat. Midoriya had optimistically hoped that Kiken would fall short in this matchup, but he knew it was never meant to be. Midoriya stood up as Shoto did the same. We can always try escaping UA again before the home visits, Midoriya added as a slight joke before they left. Shoto grinned, that would be fun. They walked in silence until they reached the corridor in which they had to part ways, to face again a minute or so later in the arena. Please don't murder me instantly, Midoriya winced. Shoto actually laughed. A slight snort of air that could be mistaken as nothing else. I thought you didn't want anyone going easy on you. Yeah, but, still. I'll try not to. Thanks. Midoriya was unexpected, and Shoto was sure there was no one else quite like him. But above all, past all the trickery, sly wit, and deceptive games he played, he was a good person, a little too good, considering, well, everything. He just wanted to help people. Sure, he went about it in a strange way, but he got results. Yeah, he definitely got results. Shoto had once had his doubts, but as he walked out into that arena to the eyes of an unjust world, Shoto was reminded that it didn't matter what happened in the end. As long as he was on the same side as Midoriya, that is. They smiled at each other, face to face on the battlefield. Shoto knew his father's gaze was on him, but he refused to look for it. He rolled his shoulder as Present Mike hyped up the match, letting the itch of his flames melt away the ice that covered him like stiff armor from an unforgiving world. He didn't hear Present Mike proclaim the beginning of their battle, but he did see Midoriya begin his charge, drawing his sword and activating his fixed shield. From the shouts and screams of excitement from his battle with Yayorozu, Shoto knew that she'd damaged it significantly. This must have been a spare that the support course girls had ready for him. With a grin, Shoto sent his first tirade of ice at Midoriya. It wasn't a giant wall akin to his battle with Zero, but if Midoriya's reflexes hadn't been good enough, he wouldn't have dodged it. Luckily enough, he did, almost slipping on the ice in the process. This made Shoto laugh a little harder and Midoriya to yell at him to shut up. Midoriya was right. He's always right. Shoto just needed to stop thinking so hard about it all. And whilst Shoto clambered and crawled up the slippery slope to a recovery he didn't know he needed, Midoriya was right there to point out where he was going and help him find his footholds. Even when he fell back down again, seemingly to where he started, Midoriya didn't give up on him, like he knew exactly how it felt. But like Shoto, Midoriya had changed during their short time at UA. He had started off so meek and unsure of himself, a determination and scarcely hidden malice only bubbling at the surface. Now, Midoriya had found his rightful place at the top of Class A's pecking order. Maybe he didn't stand a chance against Shoto, as he skidded side to dodge Shoto's constant attacks, who was barely focusing whilst he laughed at Midoriya's advances. Maybe he'd grown to be a little scary and UA should really offer more psychiatric help to members of Class A and B alike. But Shoto couldn't imagine him any other way. If UA hadn't forced Midoriya to attend, not only would the remaining members of Class A have struggled immensely to get as far as they already had, but Midoriya himself could have easily become a threat to Hero Society unlike anything they'd ever seen before. He'd send this league of villains running, and the heroes would be shaking in their boots at the thought of a quirkless man who they could easily take down one-on-one, but would never stand a chance against the power that Shoto knew Midoriya had the potential to gather. With a smile across his face, Shoto glanced up at the stands, where the teachers sat. It was hard to tell, especially with the way Shoto's hair covered his left eye, but he could just see the little white blob that he knew was Principal Nizu, smiling back at him. So, that was why Midoriya was here. And maybe it was why Shoto was too. The Class A system had its problems, glaringly obvious ones, at that, but Shoto didn't mind anymore. The real way that UA rehabilitated its students was not through teaching nor this idiotic festival, it was through the exposure to each other. Shoto turned back to the match. Midoriya was standing about 2 meters in front of him, panting heavily and holding his sword ready. He just rolled his eyes, flicking his wrist to freeze him in place, but Midoriya just jumped out of the way again, always moving, well, right, from Midoriya's perspective. At first, Shoto thought this was his usual, sword fighting routine. He'd overheard 1 or 2 of his lessons with Yaoyorozu and was quite convinced she said to always move to the right, him being right-handed. But then Shoto realized the difficulty he was having, hitting Midoriya with his ice, was not just down to him initially being rather distracted, but because he really couldn't. Shoto could only use his ice power on the right side of his body, which Midoriya consistently evaded. And now the circles Midoriya was running around him were getting closer and closer, the jabs and slashes from his sword now becoming a serious threat. Present Mike too, noticed that Midoriya was getting closer than anyone had before. Had Midoriya had another trick up his sleeve, one more smoke bomb, one more little gadget, been slightly better at wielding his blade, Shoto could have really lost. But one wrong move and Shoto got too close to him. He grabbed the sword itself, which cut into his hand, but it didn't matter. Midoriya was frozen solid in less than a second, and the round was over. You were just messing with me the entire time. Midoriya snapped, hurrying along beside Shoto as they left the arena, brushing the remnants of ice off his slightly damp clothes. He shrugged, I learned from the best. Hey. What's that supposed to mean? Besides, I couldn't freeze you because you were sticking to my left side, Shoto admitted. I'm serious, you were far more of a threat than anyone else I have faced today. Midoriya didn't say anything, but Shoto could feel him grinning. He may have been dreading it. But, this sports festival wasn't so bad after all. Alright, that's where we'll leave off for the day. Thanks so much for listening along with me today. If you enjoyed, please like and comment down below. It really helps with the algorithms. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now, lovelies.